Good evening, class. This is Deborah Panuto, and this week's PowerPoint presentation is on the life and memory of this elder, and what, of course, lies in the memories of those entering their late adulthood. This particular individual is an 84-year-old Sicilian immigrant, came to this country in the 1950s with his family, mother, father, and his only sibling sister. They landed at Ellis Island, like many, traveled into Connecticut, where he remained, where he still remains till today. At some point, his mother, father, and sister returned to Sicily, where they lived. He is, of course, predeceased by his mother and father, and his only living relative, of course, is his sister, who is, I believe, 5 or 6 years his minor. This is a gentleman who was married for 63 years before losing his wife in 2018. He has 4 adult children, 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, about 7 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. He is still very active in his community and social groups. He worked his entire life, literally from the time he stepped foot onto this land of great promise, that he calls it, and stopped working, probably never. I don't think he stopped working up until today. And so he is a person of great integrity, and we'll talk about that integrity or despair according to Erickson and Kale and Kavanaugh as we get further into details here. But let's talk a little bit about the major events that shaped this person's development. Based on the interview, I believe those things that really shaped him from the beginning were the fact that he left his country in Sicily as an adolescent, just as he's what we call coming into his own. He is yanked from the bosom of the only country he knows, the only friends he's known and grown up with, and his surroundings, to be plucked from there and placed into an entirely new country with a language he has never spoken, nor does he understand, and new cultures, new traditions, lots of things that really end up shaping his life. The second was he learned to grow up extremely quickly. He had to go to work to help support his family because his mother and father couldn't work because they didn't know the language. So being that he was young, he was put into school. From school, he would work, etc. And so he learned a great deal of responsibility from very early on. And that responsibility, first and foremost, was to care for his family, which he's carried over into his own family along the years. Some of the other things were navigation of the new language, of course, living in a new country. It was here where he found his wife, and at the age of 18, they married and started a family. Excuse me, which began his own trajectory of being responsible for others, etc. When the interview talks a bit about whether or not this person expresses integrity or despair, according to Erickson, I'd like to say that he expresses a bit of both. The outward expression of integrity, if you would, comes from the way that he's lived his life over the past 84 years with consistency about his faith, family, and work, and in that particular order as well. A bit of despair, if you will, because he's also looking at what his life was like and how different it is now. than what he had proposed it to be, maybe at some time. Of course, he also expresses a desire to spend just a bit more time with his spouse. That's a wish that he had. Time to just be together and enjoy each other's company without the worry of Alzheimer's, which is how his this debilitating attribute is part of what sent her home with Jesus. And it impeded their travel and the things that they enjoyed most, like dancing and going out and spending time with friends. And his spouse was a huge talker and communicator. And then to see her be silenced by this illness really took a toll on him, on his own cognition, where he began to second guess a little bit of everything. This loss, it asks about whether or not there's been any significant loss in his life that he's experienced. Of course, the loss of your parents is always something that is pretty difficult. But when you lose your spouse, somebody that you, well, I mean, as we say our vows, till death do us part, I don't think either spouse ever thinks that, I don't think we're ever fully prepared to lose our spouse. I certainly can tell that this gentleman was not ready to have lost her. And so after losing his wife of 63 years, just days before their anniversary, this gentle man has yet to fully grieve this loss and to let go. He goes about his day remembering every detail about his wife, Maria, as he sifts through hundreds of thousands of photos, no lie, dating back to the 1960s when they met. Filling his photo albums keeps him occupied nowadays, but it's also a painful reminder that she's no longer with him. He thanks God for the role that religion has played in his life and in the life of his family, because were it not for his involvement within the church and that religious community, he probably would not be standing on his own 2 feet today. And so he is thankful about that. To talk a little bit more, this is a man who has been heavily involved in serving the Lord through his local church. Although his time was mostly taken up by work along the years and familiar responsibilities, it never deterred this elder from making sure his family understood the importance of Christ in their lives. Sunday was a day of rest, and worship. It shaped his life and that of his wife and children as they attended service every Sunday as a family. The kids were involved in being altar boys. His daughter was a church lector from a very early age. His wife sang in the choir. The children were in band. They had their own band that played at church every Sunday. This elder served on multiple committees and stayed connected at all times. This was the glue that kept this family together, and to this day, he attributes the church to be his sole walking stick, if you will, and what keeps him on his feet. There are many things that can be said about life as an elder. It's really, it's difficult to not just see this, but to interview this person. As I describe this background, there was no other staff beside myself involved in this and this observation and interview, if you will. And in the end, I will let you know, as it has taken the past few days to get permission to share this story, really. After the interview was done, I wanted desperately for you to know not just the background, but who this really was about. This is a man who meticulously is putting photos into photo albums at the age of 84 because he feels this is his way of preserving his life. And for him, it's done through photographs. This is a man who carried around a Polaroid. Remember those old Polaroids where we could take the pictures and it would slide out immediately? he would buy one every single year to make sure he had the newest model. He would carry, when 35 millimeters came around, he would carry that camera around everywhere. It was always in his pocket, and he was snapping pictures of everything from the weather outside to a menu at a restaurant. He really has preserved the last 84 years of his life via pictures. And so he finds it important to fill these albums. His goal this week is to fill an additional 5 albums. And I'll tell you, the boxes of old photos line the floor around the kitchen table that once saw the faces of his 4 children and his spouse on a daily basis as they sat together for dinner every single night. This is a hardworking man who is no stranger to late nights. He often worked a 3rd shift job in a factory. The Sicilian culture is to put your family first above all things. This elder understood this principle, but also realized that without God, he would not have had a family to put first. And so he professes how his faith has saved him in many ways. He's a practicing Catholic, still attends church every Sunday morning. When he can, he says. He no longer drives. Many times he's helping to administer Eucharist or collect the offering or carry the gifts of the elements to the altar. He just doesn't know how to sit still, according to him. Some of the key takeaways from this particular interview is that this 84-year-old is clearly contending with his physical, cognitive, and environmental changes that are occurring that are beyond his control. And they are debilitating. They're debilitating not only to him, but to those who know him and see these changes and can't help but try and enter the mind of this 84-year-old and say, you should be proud of everything you've done. I believe that through this observation and interview, I believe he is, at least outwardly, he says he's thankful for all of the things he's been able to accomplish along the years. But I can't help but feel that there may be some regret because he always felt he had to work so hard to care for his family. This was a difficult assignment. It took a lot of time. I hesitated handing it in. Almost was willing to get a 0 than to hand it in. And earlier today was convicted, where God said, I'm making a new thing. Can you not see it? The beginning and the end is inevitable for each of us. And in that, I'm watching this 84-year-old as he enters into his adulthood, later in life, much later in life, where he sees and recognizes he doesn't have much time left. And if there is something that has really been impressed upon me with this particular class is how fleeting time is. My personal takeaways and impressions from this is that I've been given a new perspective on life, one that says, make every moment count. Be more intentional. Recognize more of the good and stop dwelling on the bad. Understand there are things fully out of our control. Be thankful for what we have, not what we want and didn't get. Because if the Lord kept it from us, there was a reason. We may not have needed it, even though we might have wanted it. And of course, the Lord always knows what is best for us. also wanted to say that, the book tells us that the struggle between or of integrity versus despair requires us to engage in a life review. As this 84-year-old elder engaged in his life review through this observation and interview, I began to engage in my own and realized the struggle of integrity versus despair. And so I leave you with the following. Love your family well. Put God first, always. Know the order that God has given us. He comes first, then your spouse, then your children, your family. Your church. Everything else comes after. Although we've been requested to not give identifying information, I told you I struggled with handing in this assignment. I wanted explicit permission from this gentleman, and I got it earlier this morning when I talked to him and said that I wanted to go ahead and do this PowerPoint, but that I really felt I wanted his permission to tell his story. And he said yes. This is the story of a Sicilian immigrant who came to this country in the 1950s. This was my father. I don't know how much time the Lord has given him, or me for that matter. But one thing I can say, my father has walked firmly with the Lord. That is not to say he wasn't without his faults, but he has walked firmly with the Lord, always before him, beside him, with the Lord walking behind him and watching over him. I am thankful for the things he's instilled in all of us, because I've now been able to instill that in my own children. And as each of us enters into adulthood, we can't help but think of our own immortality. Nothing lasts forever. Be thankful for what you have. I'm thankful I have Jesus. And I'm thankful for the lessons in this class. I appreciate your time and attention. And I'm sorry for the waterworks. I know it's not part of the assignment. Godspeed.